What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actors sits down for what should be a simple interview, only to face attack after attack from a host who seems determined to tear him down? It only took one cruel comment too many for Matthew McConaughey to stand up, walk off, and expose the real person behind Kelly Clarkson's smiling TV persona. The cameras were rolling, the audience was packed and excited. Matthew McConaughey walked onto the set of The Kelly Clarkson Show with his usual relaxed charm, waving to the crowd as they cheered. He wore a simple button-down shirt and jeans, looking like he'd just stepped off his Texas ranch. Kelly greeted him with a big hug and a bright smile, the kind she'd given hundreds of guests before. Everything seemed normal, everything seemed friendly. But within minutes, the atmosphere would shift into something nobody in that studio could have predicted. They sat down across from each other. Kelly started with the usual pleasantries, asking Matthew about his latest projects, his family, his life in Austin. Matthew answered each question with his signature drawl, taking his time, giving thoughtful responses. He talked about his kids, about teaching film at the University of Texas, about finding joy in the simple things. The audience loved it. They laughed at his stories. They clapped when he talked about his wife. This was the Matthew everyone knew and adored. But then Kelly's tone changed. "So, Matthew," she said, leaning forward with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "you've been doing a lot of these philosophical speeches lately. All this talk about finding yourself and living authentically, do you actually believe all that stuff? Or is it just good for your brand?" The audience went quiet. A few people shifted in their seats. Matthew's smile faded just slightly, but he kept his composure. He took a breath and nodded slowly. "Well, Kelly, I do believe it. I've spent a lot of years figuring out what matters to me, what kind of man I want to be. It's not about a brand. It's about living a life that feels true." Kelly laughed, but it wasn't a warm laugh. It was sharp, dismissive. Right. But come on, you're a millionaire actor who lives in a mansion. How hard can life really be for you? It's easy to talk about authenticity when you're that rich. Matthew's jaw tightened. The audience was completely silent now. You could feel the discomfort spreading through the room like a wave. But Matthew stayed calm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't get defensive. "Money doesn't solve everything, Kelly. I've been broke. I've struggled. And I've learned that happiness doesn't come from what you have. It comes from who you are and how you treat people." Kelly rolled her eyes. Actually rolled her eyes on camera. That's such a typical actor thing to say. You all act like you're so deep and enlightened, but at the end of the day, you're just entertainers. You pretend to be other people for a living. How authentic is that? The audience gasped. A few people whispered to each other. This wasn't playful banter anymore. This was an attack. Matthew sat back in his chair, studying Kelly's face. He wasn't angry yet, but you could see him trying to understand why she was coming at him like this. "Kelly, I'm not sure what's going on here, but I came on your show to have a conversation, not to be insulted." Kelly waved her hand dismissively, like she was swatting away a fly. "Oh, don't be so sensitive. I'm just asking real questions. Isn't that what you're always talking about? Being real? Having honest conversations?" "There's a difference between honesty and cruelty," Matthew said quietly. Kelly laughed again, louder this time. "Cruelty? Please. You Hollywood types are so fragile. You can dish it out in your movies, playing tough guys and rebels, but you can't handle a few direct questions." Matthew leaned forward now, his voice still calm, but firmer. "I can handle questions just fine. What I won't tolerate is disrespect. You invited me here as your guest. The least you can do is treat me with basic courtesy." The audience started to murmur. Some people were nodding in agreement with Matthew. Others looked shocked that this was happening at all. Kelly's producers were likely panicking in the control room, but the cameras kept rolling. Kelly seemed energized by the tension, like she was feeding off it. "Disrespect?" she said, her voice rising. "You want to talk about disrespect? How about all these actors who come on talk shows and give the same boring answers, promoting their projects, acting like they're doing us a favor? Maybe I'm just tired of the fake humility." "If you think I'm fake, why did you invite me here?" Matthew asked. Kelly didn't have an answer for that. She just stared at him, her smile frozen on her face. The silence stretched out. 10 seconds. 15 seconds. The audience didn't know whether to clap or stay quiet. Finally, Kelly broke the silence. "You know what your problem is, Matthew? You think you're better than everyone else. All that spiritual guru nonsense, all that talk about finding meaning. You're just another actor who got lucky and now thinks he's a philosopher." Matthew's face hardened. This had gone too far. He'd been patient. He'd tried to keep things civil, but there was a line, and Kelly had just crossed it. Kelly, I don't think I'm better than anyone, but I do think people deserve respect, and I deserve respect, and right now, you're not showing me any. Maybe you don't deserve it, Kelly shot back. The audience audibly gasped. Several people stood up, not sure if they should leave or stay. Matthew stared at Kelly for a long moment. His eyes weren't angry. They were disappointed. Sad, even. He slowly stood up from his chair, and the entire studio seemed to hold its breath. You know what, Kelly? I came here in good faith. I thought we'd have a nice conversation, but I'm not going to sit here and let you tear me down for no reason. Whatever you're dealing with, whatever made you think this was okay, I hope you figure it out, but I'm done. He started to remove his microphone. His hands were steady. His voice was steady. He wasn't storming off in rage. He was simply choosing to leave with his dignity intact. Kelly's face went pale. The reality of what was happening seemed to hit her all at once. Wait, Matthew, come on. Don't be so dramatic. We're just having a conversation. Matthew paused and looked at her one more time. No, Kelly, you were attacking me. There's a difference, and I don't have to sit here and take it. Nobody does. He set the microphone on his chair and turned to walk off the stage. The audience didn't know what to do. A few people started clapping for Matthew, then a few more. Then half the audience was on their feet, applauding him as he walked toward the exit. Kelly sat frozen in her chair, her mouth slightly open, watching her show fall apart in real time. Matthew, please, she called after him. Let's just talk about this. But Matthew didn't turn around. He gave a small wave to the audience, a sad smile on his face, and walked through the stage door. The clapping grew louder. People were cheering now, not for Kelly, for Matthew, for standing up for himself, for refusing to be treated poorly just because he was on someone else's show. Kelly looked at the cameras, then at her audience, then down at her desk. Her producers were shouting in her earpiece, but it was too late. The damage was done. She tried to laugh it off, tried to make a joke about actors being sensitive, but nobody was laughing with her. The audience had turned. They'd seen what really happened. They'd watched her push and push until a genuinely kind person had no choice but to walk away. Well, Kelly said, her voice shaking slightly, I guess we'll take a quick break. But everyone knew there was no coming back from this. Behind the scenes, Matthew stood in the hallway outside the studio, his hands in his pockets. A production assistant approached him nervously, asking if he was okay, if he needed anything. Matthew gave her a kind smile. I'm fine, sweetheart, thank you. I just need to go. Another assistant ran up, apologizing profusely, saying that Kelly wanted to speak with him privately, that maybe they could work this out. Matthew shook his head gently. There's nothing to work out. She made her choices. I made mine. It's as simple as that. He started walking toward the exit, his boots echoing in the hallway. Staff members peeked out from doorways, whispering, some giving him supportive nods. One older cameraman stopped him. Mr. McConaughey, I've been working in television for 30 years, and I've never seen someone handle themselves with that much grace under pressure. Good for you. Matthew patted him on the shoulder. Thank you, friend. I appreciate that. Back in the studio, Kelly tried to continue the show after the commercial break, but the energy was completely gone. The audience sat in uncomfortable silence. Her next guest, a pop singer who was supposed to perform, could feel the tension and gave a short, awkward interview before rushing through her song. Kelly kept trying to smile, kept trying to act like everything was normal, but her hands were shaking. She stumbled over her words. She forgot her next guest's name. When they finally wrapped for the day, Kelly went straight to her dressing room and closed the door. Her team stood outside, unsure of what to say or do. Inside, Kelly sat on her couch, staring at her phone as the clip started circulating online. The moment Matthew stood up, the moment he called her out, the moment the audience cheered for him and turned against her. Meanwhile, Matthew was already in his car, driving back to his hotel. He called his wife and told her what happened. She listened quietly, then said, I'm proud of you for walking away. That took strength. It didn't feel strong, Matthew said. It felt sad. I don't understand why she came at me like that. Some people are hurting inside, his wife said, and they take it out on others. That's not your fault. Matthew nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Yeah, I guess you're right. He hung up and drove in silence for a while, watching the Austin skyline come into view. He thought about what happened, about how quickly things had turned, about the look on Kelly's face when he stood up to leave. He didn't feel victorious. He didn't feel like he'd won anything. He just felt tired, tired of people being cruel for no reason, tired of having to defend his right to be treated with basic respect. But he also felt something else, relief. Relief that he hadn't stayed. Relief that he'd drawn a line and stuck to it. Relief that he'd shown everyone watching, including himself, that it's okay to walk away when someone is treating you badly. That you don't have to sit there and take it just because you're on television or because walking away might cause a scene. The audience members who'd been in the studio that day left buzzing with conversation. Some were angry at Kelly. Others were confused about what they'd just witnessed. But almost all of them agreed on one thing. Matthew McConaughey had handled himself with incredible dignity. He hadn't yelled, hadn't cursed, hadn't thrown insults back at Kelly. He'd simply stated his boundaries, and when those boundaries continued to be crossed, he'd removed himself from the situation. One audience member, a woman in her 50s, was interviewed by a blogger outside the studio. "I've been watching Kelly's show since it started," she said. "I've always liked her, but what she did today was wrong. Matthew was nothing but polite and respectful, and she just kept attacking him. I don't know what got into her, but she lost a fan today." Another audience member, a young man in his 20s, said, "That was the most real thing I've ever seen on a talk show. Usually everything is so scripted and fake, but that was genuine. And honestly, I have so much respect for Matthew for walking out. Nobody should have to sit there and be insulted like that." Inside the studio's green room, other guests who were scheduled to appear on future episodes were having second thoughts. If Kelly could turn on Matthew McConaughey, one of the nicest guys in Hollywood, what would she do to them? Agents started making phone calls. Publicists started rescheduling. The fallout was immediate and widespread. Kelly's team tried to do damage control. They released a statement saying that the interview had been taken out of context, that it was all meant to be playful banter that just didn't translate well on camera. But anyone who watched the footage could see that wasn't true. Kelly's tone had been hostile. Her words had been cutting. Her body language had been aggressive. There was no misunderstanding. No misinterpretation. It was exactly what it looked like. Some of Kelly's defenders tried to spin it differently. They said Matthew was being too sensitive, that he should have been able to take a joke, that celebrities need to be able to handle tough questions. But those arguments fell flat. There's a difference between tough questions and personal attacks. There's a difference between challenging someone and belittling them, and most people could see that difference clearly. Matthew never released a public statement about what happened. He didn't go on other talk shows to tell his side of the story. He didn't post about it on social media. He simply moved on with his life, teaching his classes, spending time with his family, working on his projects. When reporters asked him about it, he gave a simple answer. "Sometimes people have bad days. I hope Kelly's doing okay." That response, more than anything else, showed who Matthew really was. Even after being disrespected on national television, he didn't trash Kelly. He didn't try to destroy her reputation. He just expressed hope that she was all right and left it at that. It was the kind of grace that can't be faked. The kind of character that shows up in how you treat people who've treated you poorly. Kelly eventually addressed the situation on her show a week later. She looked tired. Her smile seemed forced. She said she'd had a bad day, that she'd let her personal frustrations affect her professional behavior, and that she was sorry. She didn't mention Matthew by name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. The apology felt hollow to many viewers. It felt like something her PR team had written for her, something she had to say to try to save her show. But the damage was done. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. Audience numbers dropped, sponsors became nervous, and Kelly's reputation, which had been built on being the friendly, relatable girl-next-door type, had taken a serious hit. All because she'd decided to attack a guest who'd done nothing to deserve it. Matthew, on the other hand, saw his reputation grow even stronger. People praised him for his composure, for his dignity, for knowing when to walk away. Young actors reached out to him, asking for advice on how to handle difficult situations in the industry. He became a symbol of standing up for yourself without being aggressive or cruel in return. One of Matthew's friends, another actor, called him a few days after the incident. "Man, everyone's talking about what happened. Are you okay?" Matthew laughed softly. "Yeah, I'm fine. It was uncomfortable in the moment, but I'm at peace with how I handled it." "You handled it perfectly," his friend said. "A lot of guys would have lost their temper or said something they'd regret. But you kept your cool and just left. That took real strength." "It's not about strength," Matthew said. "It's about knowing your worth. I know I don't deserve to be talked to that way. And once I knew that, the choice was easy. Stay and accept disrespect, or leave and maintain my self-respect. I chose me. His friend was quiet for a moment. That's profound, man. Matthew chuckled. See, this is the stuff Kelly made fun of me for. But it's real, and it matters. The incident became a teaching moment. Communication professors used it as an example of conflict resolution. Therapists talked about it with their clients when discussing boundaries. Parents showed the clip to their teenagers to demonstrate the importance of standing up for yourself. Matthew never intended to become a role model for handling disrespect, but that's exactly what happened. In the weeks that followed, Matthew received hundreds of messages from people thanking him. People who'd been in abusive relationships and finally found the courage to leave. People who'd been bullied at work and decided to report it. People who'd been accepting mistreatment for years because they didn't think they deserved better. They all said the same thing. Watching Matthew stand up and walk away gave them permission to do the same in their own lives. One message in particular stuck with Matthew. It was from a high school teacher who wrote, "I showed my students the clip of your interview. We had a long discussion about respect, boundaries, and dignity. Several students came to me afterward and said it helped them realize they don't have to accept being treated poorly by friends or partners. Thank you for being an example of quiet strength." Matthew read that message 3 times. He saved it, because that's what mattered to him. Not the fame, not the applause, but the idea that his actions might help someone else find their own strength. Kelly's show continued, but it was never quite the same. The incident had revealed something that couldn't be hidden again. Behind the warm smile and the bubbly personality, there was someone capable of cruelty. And once the audience saw that, they couldn't unsee it. Some people forgave her. Some people moved on. But some people never came back. Matthew went back to his life in Austin. He taught his film classes, emphasizing to his students the importance of treating everyone with respect, from the biggest stars to the crew members setting up lights. He talked about how the entertainment industry can bring out the worst in people if you let it, but that you always have a choice in how you treat others. He never spoke negatively about Kelly. When students asked him about the incident, he'd simply say, "Everyone has moments they're not proud of. What matters is what we learn from them and how we grow." But privately, Matthew did reflect on what happened. He thought about how quickly a normal conversation had turned hostile, how Kelly's questions had shifted from curious to cruel, how he'd given her multiple chances to change course, and she'd kept pushing. He thought about the audience members who'd cheered when he left, and what that said about people's hunger for authenticity and accountability. Most of all, he thought about the decision to stand up and walk away. In that moment, he'd had 3 choices. He could have fought back, matching Kelly's hostility with his own. He could have stayed and endured, suffering through the rest of the interview in silence. Or he could leave. He'd chosen to leave, and he'd never regretted it for a second. Because here's what Matthew understood that day, what he'd learned through years of life experience. You teach people how to treat you. If you accept disrespect, you're telling them it's okay. If you fight back with more disrespect, you're lowering yourself to their level. But if you calmly state your boundaries and remove yourself when those boundaries are crossed, you're showing them and everyone watching that you value yourself. And that's the most powerful message of all. The studio audience that day witnessed something rare. They saw a real moment in an industry full of manufactured ones. They saw someone choose dignity over drama. They saw someone walk away from toxicity without burning bridges or seeking revenge. And they saw what true class looks like under pressure. One audience member later wrote on social media, "I was there. I saw the whole thing. Matthew was calm, respectful, and clear. Kelly was out of line. And when he stood up to leave, I started clapping before I even realized I was doing it. It was instinctive, because we all knew he was doing the right thing." That's what made the moment so powerful. It wasn't planned. It wasn't scripted. It was a genuine human being reaching their limit and choosing to prioritize their well-being over staying in an uncomfortable situation. And in a world where people are constantly told to grin and bear it, to not make waves, to just deal with mistreatment, Matthew's decision to simply walk away was revolutionary. The conversation it sparked lasted for months. Think pieces were written, podcasts discussed it, therapists used it as a case study, because it touched on something universal. The question of when it's okay to remove yourself from a situation, even when it might seem rude or dramatic to do so. Matthew's answer was clear. It's okay whenever your boundaries are being violated. It's okay whenever someone is treating you with contempt. It's okay to choose yourself. Kelly learned a hard lesson that day. She learned that being a host doesn't give you the right to attack your guests. She learned that audiences can sense cruelty, even when it's dressed up as honesty. She learned that reputation is fragile and trust is hard to rebuild. And hopefully, she learned that everyone, no matter how famous or successful, deserves basic human respect. Matthew didn't need to learn anything that day because he already knew it. He knew his worth, he knew his boundaries, and he knew when to walk away. That knowledge, that self-awareness, that inner strength, that's what made him the good guy in this story. Not because he was perfect, but because when tested, he chose the high road every single time. The walk from that chair to the stage exit probably took less than 30 seconds. But in those 30 seconds, Matthew McConaughey showed millions of people what it looks like to stand up for yourself with grace, to refuse mistreatment without becoming bitter, and to know that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply leave. And that's a lesson worth far more than any talk show appearance could ever be.